On this play, the offense drives to the basket and the defender jumps at the same time as the offensive player and gets a foul called on him. Is that a good call or a bad call? This was a good call. The defender is out of position, tries to catch up, but is a step behind. He bumps the offense just enough to push him off course, but the main foul occurs when the defender undercuts the offensive player by the back and does not allow him a chance to land. In this situation, the defense has his hands out, is in good defensive stance, and the offense runs into him at the point of attack, initiating a foul call. Is that a good call or a bad call? This was a good call. The defender was in good defensive stance, with his body squared up and his hands out. But notice his feet are never quite set as he runs into the offense and did not occupy the space at the point of attack. Remember, just because you didn't make any contact with your hands does not automatically exempt you from being called a foul on. This was a block. On this play, the offensive player drives and the defense has his hands straight up and is called on a foul. Is that a good call or a bad call? This was a good call. This actually is very common occurrence in games. The defender has his hands straight up in the air in good defensive position and at the last possible second puts his hands down, hits the offense, then puts his hand back up as if he had his arms straight up the whole time. This was an obvious foul, but the game of basketball is so fast, sometimes not even the person fouling realizes what he did. That's why they're referees. On this play, the offense drives to the basket, appears to be fouled, yet a traveling violation was called instead. Is that a good call or a bad call? This was a good call. The offense did get fouled, however, not before he traveled. Notice how he subtly takes 3 steps after he picked up the ball. This is a very important difference as well. You can take 1 step and a hop, but both feet have to land at the same time. This is the main difference in travel violations of this kind. To not be called a travel, your both feet have to touch the ground at the same time after that first step. In this situation, the offense drives to the hoop and the defense slaps what seems to be the ball out of the player's hand, but gets called for a foul. Is that a good call or a bad call? This was a good call. At first glance, it seems like a clean block, but as you can see, the defense clearly slaps the offensive player's forearm. Notice how the arm goes backwards. If this was a clean block, the arm would not have jerked back the way it did. This was a very controversial play at the time, but the video does not lie. On this play, the offense drives baseline and gets nudged in the back by the defense number 23. As the offensive player goes up for the layup, he also seems to get hit by the defense number 12, ensuing a foul to be called. Is that a good call or a bad call? This was a bad call. This play, even though seems easy enough to catch, was actually very difficult. Even looking at it on video in slow motion several times was hard to catch. It seems like the defensive player's forearm is pushing the offensive player in the back as he drives, but he never actually touches him. Number 12 goes up to block the shot, causing the player to turn, not by contact, but by the offensive player trying to avoid the block. It looks like the defense turned the offense in midair, which was not the case. This simply should have been a play on. In this situation, the free throw shooter shoots his free throw and crosses the line almost immediately after the shot, yet no violation was called. Is that a good call or a bad call? This was a bad call. The players standing in their spots can enter the paint upon release of the ball. However, the free throw shooter cannot cross the free throw line, or any other player behind the three-point line for that matter, until the ball hits the rim. This player tried to do this later in the game as well, and was called for it. But for the first time around, both referees missed it. On this play, the offense drives to the three-point line to take a three-point shot to send the game into double overtime. As the player shoots, the defense is called for the foul. Is that a good call or a bad call? This was a good call. The defensive player puts his hands up at first, but then stands right under the shooter. By rule, the defense needs to allow the offensive player a chance to land after his shot. This rule is put in place for the player's protection. If this wasn't in place, then the offensive players would be undercut while shooting all the time with no repercussion to the defense. On this free throw situation, the ball is released, the players go in for the rebound, and the orange team is called for an over-the-back violation. Is that a good call or a bad call? This was a bad call. The player on the orange team that was called for the over-the-back foul is very athletic. He actually jumped over the other player to keep the ball alive. What seemed to be an over-the-back during the game was actually a good play. On this inbounds play, number 23 for the offense curls off a screen to get free for the ball then trips, but nothing was called and play continues. Is that a good call or a bad call? I still don't know. Sometimes not even the camera can catch exactly what happened. Originally, the offense seems to have tripped over his own foot. On video, the reason for the player tripping does look like there may have been contact by the defense. However, the trip was caused because it seemed like the offensive player took a long stride backwards into the defense's shin. Intent on the defense is not a reason to call or not call a foul, but more importantly, who is occupying the space first. At game speed, both referees' view were obstructed and no call was made. What did you think of the calls made? Please leave a comment below and let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.